Good morning, good afternoon, good evening, wherever you are in the world. Thank you for joining us for this week's edition of the SMIE Consulting Midweek Roundup. It's Wednesday, February 23rd, 2022, and today on the Roundup we're going to be covering and answering the following three questions. What countries are poised to send more students abroad? Second, why does USCIS's new mission statement matter? And third, how should U.S. universities be recruiting internationally? We'll take a look at these three questions and more on today's SMIE Consulting Midweek Roundup. As we do each week, we take our news stories that we bring together in the form of these questions from our newsletter that comes out Monday mornings at 9 a.m. Eastern. If you're not already subscribed to the newsletter called All the SMIE News Fit to Share, that stands for Social Media and International Education News, we bring you at least 5 social media stories and 10 to 15 to 20, sometimes 30 international education stories that we compile each week in this newsletter format. And we take the themes, some of the core themes from that newsletter, and cover those in depth here on the Roundup on Wednesday afternoons at 1 p.m. Eastern. So if you haven't already subscribed, I'm dropping a link to the most recent edition of this week's newsletter, as well as the subscribe page on our SMIE Consulting webpage. That's smieconsulting.org/subscribe. So let's get started with our first question of the day. First up, what countries are poised to send more students abroad? And this is an interesting one, and one that you will find a number of answers. We've covered in recent days. We've covered information from other reports from ISEF, from other sources. Holon IQ is a recent addition that is predicting which markets are going to become our future senders or increased senders of students abroad. And I say this in the broader context of global student mobility, not just U.S.-bound student mobility. And it gets some audiences get very touchy when it comes to data. For a lot of different reasons, because they find there's contradictory data in their own countries that supports different conclusions, that the historical data doesn't really necessarily support that, and maybe some prognosticators are getting a little bit too keen on certain markets. But there's always data. Data is good to have. Knowing whether it's accurate data is another thing entirely. But we're going to be taking a look today at a report and a webinar that had been making the rounds in the last couple of weeks from Western Union. They had an interesting Pi News webinar sponsored last week that touched on some of their key findings. Had I think 1 or 2 university reps, one in China, one that might be U.S. focused and UK focused. So we take what they say here, and because it is primarily future looking, with some interest, because obviously anytime you have folks that are taking a look at your industry and what forces might be shaping it in the years to come. You see, looking at what's happening in some of the key outbound markets, you see some of those demographic trends, you see some of the youth population numbers, and we talked about that a couple weeks ago when we were looking at some ISIF and Holon IQ reports. What we see from the top 4 English-speaking destinations, Canada, US, UK, and Australia, that for Canada, this report should suggest Indian students are going to continue to rise from 151,000 in 2019 to 195,000 in 2025. So a 4.4% CAGR. I'm not quite sure what that is, but my Canadian friends will, I'm sure, chime in with that response. For U.S., Chinese students are expected to capture an extra 1.3% of the market share of inbound students by 2025 compared to 2019. So everybody's kind of looking at pre-pandemic and 3-year out data in this report. For the UK, now this is where it gets a little bit interesting. Despite Brexit, and the report says 85,000 more international students expected to study in the UK by 2025, taking the total from 557 in 2019 to 642. And we've already heard that as of 2022, the numbers are already at 600,000, so that's an additional 42,000 increase in the next 3 years. There's also some data further down the chain here about India that reflects some data that doesn't seem to match what the actual numbers already are for Indian students in the United Kingdom. So there's some one of my colleagues across the pond is suggesting that the folks who compiled this report were operating in a dark room without real context and data to really match the findings that already exist. So they might have been operating in a vacuum and just going on their own numbers. So interesting to see where this comes from if you do a little bit of a deeper dive into it, and we'll certainly take the time to do that. Australia is looking to grow again, obviously with their doors reopened to international students as of this past December. We now see Nepal should overtake both Malaysia and Vietnam to enter Australia's top 3 inbound markets behind China and India. So interesting growth in those markets. Nepal, obviously, being one of the ones that is probably already on most U.S. colleges' radar, for good or bad, depending on the kinds of students you might have been getting in the past. But overall, if you look at some of the macro trends that the report does cover, and not necessarily country-specific ones, they see by 2025 that there will be 1.34 million Chinese students leaving to study abroad versus 1.1 in 2019. That's a 4% cumulative aggregate gross something CAGR. We'll get the definition of that soon, I'm hoping. We look at 79% of growth in international students from 2019 to 2025 should come from Asian countries. No surprise there. That's where the largest percentage growth will come from. You look at some other markets. Germany should record other markets, I should say all ROW destination markets. Not sure what that one is either, but suggests that Germany and others should record a 40% market share versus 35% in 2019. So we'll see what these look like more in depth, but there's certainly some interesting data to be sure. One of the charts that they have here that is rather interesting, if you look at it a little bit more closely, it shows some real interesting looks at some of the macro trends in some key markets. For example, China and India obviously make up, in terms of biggest sending countries abroad. You see China and India certainly reflecting the largest numbers, raw numbers of students going abroad. We see China, as of the forecast data through 2025, increasing to 1.343 million, and India at 619,000. So China's basically doubling up India as the 2 largest senders. But that's with significant growth from India. I mean, just looking at those numbers from 2015 to 2025, that decade of growth, 5 years of data we have versus 5 years of predictive data, they're anticipating in that 10-year span from 2015, Indian students studying abroad was about 257,000 students, and they're expecting that to more than double in the next 5 years, over that 10-year span, I should say. So up to 619,000. So China, nominal growth, certainly significant growth. We're not going to say nominal, from 818,000 in 2015 to 1.34 in 2025 predicted. So that's a 500,000 increase. So about 40%. Now 60% growth there, but not as nearly as at the pace of India. But interesting to see that currently, or as of 5 years ago, 7 years ago now, we were looking at Germany as the number 3 country at 117,000. They're predicting them to have just nominal growth by 2025 to 119,000. Vietnam, however, jumping up from 11th in 2015 of 68,000 up to 164,000, so more than doubling there as well in that 10-year span. So we'll see where it goes here. I think there's some of this data here is particularly not quite sure, and I'd have to dig quite a bit deeper. It says that they're getting their data from Australian Trade and Investment Company, HESA for the UK, IIE for the US, UNESCO, Oxford Economics, and Western Union Business Solutions from December 2021. So interesting where that data is coming from, but you see some interesting things here, that China, as an overall share of the outbound student market, is going to reach 28.8% in that in the next 3 years. So it's on a path to continue to dominate, as it has in most countries, most Western countries, the UK, Australia, US. They're anywhere from 30 to 40% of the enrolled international students in those countries. So no surprise that they're going to continue to dominate on the outbound side with just some 1.4 or 4% growth in the next 3 or 4 years. So there's actually a fairly, for the first maybe half of the report, we see some decent data in here from UNESCO and some other things that do look at what some of the economic variables that they're taking in to forecast these international student flows. I'm not taking this as gospel. I'm just putting it out there as one other set of data that you might want to have a look at. Maybe it'll have some data on some countries that you aren't already considering, and it might be worth worth a deeper look if you haven't already gotten some interesting if you haven't already gotten some student flows from these countries, there may be ones where you start exploring a little bit more what that might look like for you. So that's what we have from the first story. What countries are poised to send more students abroad? Vietnam, Nepal, and India and China are obviously going to continue to send significant numbers abroad. That's no surprise there. And some of the countries further down the chain, Saudi Arabia, obviously we've seen a big drop-off since 2015, but there's a potential chance of a resurgence that we don't necessarily see captured in this Western Union data. So we'll look at what's to come with that. Some of that data certainly doesn't match some of the historical data we have in the US and UK, and current data even. So we'll look at that with a little bit more of a fine-tooth comb moving forward for sure. But always a good topic to revisit every so often in terms of what are some of the new and up and coming markets, but also some of those current markets that are poised to grow even bigger. And that's certainly something you want to know and be prepared to make the case for against why you want to go recruiting in certain areas, certain parts of the world, certain major markets. We'll take a look at that on a regular basis here on the Roundup, because that's the kind of information that you need. You need to know what the data is out there and what's in terms of predictive models for some of the up and coming markets, and we'll be sure to keep you posted on those. Moving on to our next question. And it is one that, for those that have been around and survived the Trump era of international education and the Great Resignation that we've also experienced in the last 2 years of the pandemic, we are seeing some significant changes, a lot of them symbolic, but a lot of them very concrete ones, like reversing the Muslim travel bans and all the other proposals that were floated by the Trump administration, like ending the DS status, getting rid of that policy, that proposal, some changes to H-1B, turning that back to the traditional lottery instead of salary-based, and some other ones that we've seen happen over the last few months. But one of the ones that really, for most of us in the field, that kind of was a real poke in the eye, frankly, I guess it's a kind way to put it, was the Trump administration's decision to change the mission statement of USCIS. That before the Trump administration came along, that the formerly INS, what became U.S. Citizenship and Immigration Service, had the phrase "Nation of Immigrants" as part of its mission statement of who the U.S. was. that the Trump changes in February of 2018, this is from a CNN Politics article, took a more hardline approach with the statement that emphasized safeguarding its integrity and securing the homeland, and really not showing any welcome mat whatsoever for giving hope to immigrants and international students and other visitors to the United States that we were a welcoming destination. And certainly no surprise to anyone who's worked in international ed as to what the response was to that. The American Immigration Lawyers Association at the time called it an insidious attempt by the Trump administration to diminish the valuable contributions that immigrants have made to the United States. No doubt that would be the case from our perspective too, in international education. So what you have seen, the change has been made to under the Biden administration. The agency is now taking a different approach, using words like welcome and respect, as well as shortening the length of the statement, which was quite wordy. And the new mission statement reads as follows: USCIS upholds America's promise as a nation of welcome and possibility, with fairness, integrity, and respect for all we serve. And I think that really speaks to the heart of who America is. And who we want to be. It's aspirational too. We're coming out of a period of 2 years of pandemic and 4 years of a previous administration that was anything but those things, welcoming and respect for all and possibilities and fairness and all of these things. So when it comes to immigrants and international education, certainly has suffered quite a bit, and to have this new mission statement reflect what we in international education truly believe in our hearts is why we do what we do, and why we want to promote our institutions to students abroad, to come here and study and be on our campuses and experience American culture and what this country has to offer, and to experience the range of cultures that are already here and that have made up this country and made it into the incredible land of opportunity it has always been. And as an immigrant who came to the U.S. At age 5, was an L2 intra-company transfer dependent when my dad's company transferred him from London to St. Louis, Missouri, where I grew up. And our family came here. Why did we come? I've had this conversation many times over the years with my dad. It was for a better opportunity for his family, for us, and to come to a country that allowed his sons and his daughter to pursue whatever educational dreams they chose. And to do so where we wanted, when we wanted, and in whatever field we wanted to study. And he would support us. My mother supported us throughout all of it. And that is what we would all hope for. And that out of our country that we love. Sometimes we don't like it so much, but we still love our country at its heart. And I think this mission statement reflects the true heart of America. And when I talk about this topic a lot, and well, it's just a mission statement. People ask, well, why would you spend that time on it? And it's sometimes these kind of symbolic gestures have significant resonance, both in positive and negative ways. They were certainly negative and symbolic in terms of how, when the Trump administration made that change away from a nation of immigrants to strengthening the homeland, that affects people, affects people's impressions of your country. Of people who might want to come here. It affects their impressions of the country. Well, do they really want us there? And yes, they're just words. They're words on a page, but words matter. And how we talk about ourselves has changed in the last few years as a country, in going through the different administrations and their very different perspectives these last two administrations have had on those from outside who want to be here and want to have a piece of the American pie, and what that means. So these things matter, and in terms of getting rid of, stop using the term illegal aliens and aliens in general. It just seems quite outdated and doesn't make a whole lot of sense, and really just disenfranchises people and makes them into something less than human. And that's certainly not something that we're about in international education at all. We want to provide every student that comes to our countries, comes to our colleges, the opportunities to make the most of their time here, whether it's for a semester on exchange or whether it's for a full degree that leads to work, that leads to another degree, that leads to maybe permanent residency and citizenship someday. Those dreams are possible here, and when you have an administration that whose words are out there and are backed up by actions. And I think over the past year or so, of the Biden administration, we've seen actions follow from their words. In some cases, more than others. There's some areas that are still on the international ed side and we hope that they get there before they leave office. That they have an opportunity to develop an international education strategy at the national level. That's a dream for most all of us in international education, to finally see concrete steps, or the fact that they're even talking about it. It hadn't happened for 20 years, but now we're at a point now where we hope that some more concrete steps get put in place to make an international ed strategy happen for this country. Because it is happening in every other major destination market, and they have not only international education policies at the national level, they have supportive policies that open doors and are open, that are constructive ways of getting action steps made by the government, the stakeholders in higher education, in English language training, in other industries connected to international education, can, in these other countries, have direct contact with the decision makers, and they listen, and that they have a seat at the table, and that really matters. And advisory committees are all well and good, and those have happened in the past, and might be, and certainly we saw the Homeland Security one restarted recently. We hope that continues, but there's not necessarily something that we can all say definitively, yes, we're moving in a concrete direction toward an international ed strategy. We're not there yet, and it may be years before we get there, but let's start having that conversation, those very real conversations that we need to move our country in the right direction when it comes to competing with our peers, because that's the global marketplace for international students has not gotten less competitive. It's gotten more crowded. Our share of the pie has shrunk from 30% 25 years ago to around 20% now. Our numbers have continued to go up with the pandemic exceptions. We'll be back over 1 million students in the next year or so, and continue in our upward trajectory. But we can't assume we're going to get there on our own merits. We need government to support us and help us get there, and to have policies that make it easier for students to come here and to stay here. The serious students, the funded students that have from institutional or personal sources their own ability to pay their bills. We need the support in order to make that happen, policies that make that happen. And supportive policies once they're here as well. In terms of post-study work, we always talk about that, and certainly the STEM OPT expansion of majors is a big plus, and will continue to be. But there's always going to be things that could be improved. We talk about adding health-related majors into more of the STEM fields. It's surprising that they're scientific. Why aren't those? Biology and hard sciences and are not too distant cousins from the health sciences. So why aren't they health sciences included in STEM? That's a very, very important conversation, I think, that needs to happen, and to continue the positive impression post-study work has for international students coming to the U.S. And certainly making F1 dual intent. We've talked about that before. That's something that NAFSA's recommendations have been leading up to that. The Biden administration hasn't proposed anything yet with that language in bills, but that might not be in this first term. If they get a second term, who knows? But there's certainly a lot that we're starting to see words put in place that matter and signify a change in direction, positive changes in direction for international education, and ones that we can certainly use. And this is the important thing. When these kinds of positive changes happen, what's wrong with sending a quick message out to your database and say, hey, your prospective students and parents, and say, hey, our country, we've had our share of troubles in the recent past, but our country recognizes your value to us, and that we are upholding our promise as a nation of welcome and possibility, with fairness, integrity, and respect for all we serve. Send a message out to your prospective student audiences that announces this change and lets them know that, hey, we're back, and we're sorry for some of the things that might have been said and done in the past, but we're back and we want you here, and our government's stepping up and showing that they want you here too. So let's make that happen. And it's a quick, it doesn't have to be anything long and thought out, but put it out on your social, put it out in a quick email out to your database of changes on the U.S. government front that are welcome ones for prospective international students and their parents. Can't hurt. So that's question 2. Let's finish up today with question 3, and it's a meaty one. It's a meaty one, but that we're not going to go too overboard with it. It is AIEA week in international education world, and many of my colleagues are busy in New Orleans getting together and reconnecting for the first time in a couple of years for AIEA colleagues, getting together and with conference presentations and all the associated events surrounding those conferences. And I certainly wish you all nothing but the best for your time in New Orleans this week. But let's talk about this question: how should U.S. universities be recruiting internationally? And this theme actually comes out of an recently released 2022 must-read, AIE's Handbook of International Education, that AIE just released in the last couple of weeks. It's the second edition of this book. And it is available. The folks at INTED have done a nice 3 quick takeaways that I'll touch on here. It's certainly one that I think there are a lot of great publications. NAFSA certainly has a great range of publications for international education, but this one is particularly strong. And again, it's an AIEA publication, Handbook of International Education. And I'll be covering here the 3 takeaways that the INTED folks have identified from this book that are takeaways for student recruitment. The first takeaway is the U.S. remains a strong preference for students globally, but the competition is tightening. Just what we were talking about earlier. It's an increasingly competitive marketplace for international student interest. So that we are a strong preference, but our tuition is reliably high. Financial aid is reliably low. And the road to finding in-country work after graduation is difficult. This is from the INTED folks. Not necessarily true elsewhere, where tuition is often lower and the path to employment clearer. So many headwinds for the United States in this respect. Germany, for example, higher education, national priority. Government is keen to use institutions to train employable personnel in science, engineering, and health-related programs. This is from the INTED article again. As an extension, Germany makes it relatively easy for international students to stay and work after they graduate, so much so that over 80% of international applicants to German universities are motivated by in-country career prospects. Further, a growing number of the country's graduate-level programs are now offered in English, making Germany that much more interesting to prospective Anglophone students. And tuition is important there too, because I've had colleagues at other UK universities talking about how Germany's their tuition prices are so much lower, certainly for EU and non-EU students. EU students get in basically for free; they just pay for their housing, maybe a small fee. But non-EU students, their fees are very low in comparison to what UK, Australia, Canada, the US charge. In the UK. So what we see that we are expensive in the US, and we've got to show quality and outcomes for what we charge. And compared to other countries that might not have as great of reputations, but making pathways much smoother and that lead to work a lot easier to access. So let's take some cues from some of these countries that are doing it right. So we'll take a look at that. Second takeaway from the INTED folks from the AIEA report, commission-based agents are now business as usual for many universities. And this is true. It is one thing that is probably the greatest change in international education over the last 15 years has been the accelerated adoption of working with educational commission-based agents as part of recruitment strategies. Where back in the noughties, it was probably mid-noughties, maybe a third of U.S. institutions would admit to using agents. But now it's easily half are fully engaging with the university or with agents overseas, and more are considering it. The lion's share are probably considering it in one way or another outside the most elite of our institutions. So we've been playing the catch-up game when it comes to working with agents. And a lot of institutions have frankly tried and failed with agents because they overinvested in one country or decided to go sign every agent under the sun and reap some very unintended consequences as a result of that. How you manage agents matters as much as the decision to use them in the first place. It's one thing to just go ahead and say, oh, we're going to start using agents in places that we're not traveling to. And let's face it, nobody's traveled anywhere the last couple of years up until the last couple of months, international recruitment-wise. And having boots on the ground matters. And having people who can connect with students where you can't and have the conversations locally that you're not able to have, that makes a difference too. So the third takeaway is diversity is a long game for international recruitment. And we've talked about this many times about how you plan your recruitment and how much time, money, and capital you're investing in certain markets. Because if you're already 40% Chinese, do you really need to be taking 2 extra trips there every year over and above what you're already doing? Or can you redirect some of those resources into some more up-and-coming markets in other areas of the world that you don't have representation from yet in as significant numbers? So diversity is one of those ones that will never not be important, and certainly on any campus that I'm working with, I always make that case is you got to diversify. You can't put all your agent eggs in one basket and all your country focus in one country in terms of where you're recruiting students, because that will just lead to significant challenges down the road. If you just go where the students are and just if you know you got a good pipeline in one country, just going to ride that for all you can and milk it for all you can, that can have significant negative impacts on your campus culture and your international student culture. So some very important lessons to be learned and good, excellent takeaways as defined from the INTED folks. So kudos to them for bringing them up. That's all we have for you this week on the Midweek Roundup. I appreciate you all sticking with us through this, and we're looking forward to continuing conversations with you in the weeks and months to come. So until next time, have a great day.